Hey, welcome to Spoiler Piece Theater, the podcast that doesn't give a shit about spoilers. We just want to talk about the movies. My name is Dave Riedel. I write about movies. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a member of the Boston Online Film Critics Association.
My name is Evan Crean. My pronouns are he, him. I am co-chair of the Boston Online Film Critics Association, co-author of your 80s Movie Guide to Better Living, and co-host of the It's the Pictures podcast.
And my name is Megan Kearns. My pronouns are she, her. I write reviews for Edge Media Network. I'm a co-host of the Slashers podcast. I too am a member of the Boston Online Film Critics Association and a member of Gallica, the Society of LGBTQ Entertainment Critics.
So this week on Ye Old Show, we are going to be talking about 3 films. But before we get into those 3 films, we just wanted to say over on our Patreon, we are actually spoiler piecing a film with a spoiler ending, an ending, spoiler-worthy ending. It's a twist ending. And we were talking about the 1987 spy thriller, which is also kind of giving it away, just saying that. No Way Out, starring Kevin Costner, Sean Young, and Gene Hackman. We had a lot of fun talking about that one. It's a movie we had all seen, but not basically since 1987, except for Evan, who would have been, an infant then. Yeah. So he saw it later. But otherwise, yeah. So this week we're talking about 3 movies. We have Beetlejuice Beetlejuice, which, hey, guess what? It's a sequel to Beetlejuice. We have a family drama. Let's call it a family drama. His 3 Daughters, starring everyone. Carrie Coon, Elizabeth Olsen, and Natasha Lyonne.
Yep.
And I almost said we have No Way Out, which is not what we have next. We have the documentary Merchant Ivory, which is about Merchant Ivory. So let's dive right in with Beetlejuice. I had hoped to see that. I didn't get to the screening because of life, but Megan saw it. So, Megan,
Sure did.
What do you think of Beetlejuice Beetlejuice, the much delayed sequel to Beetlejuice?
Yeah, so Tim Burton is directing again, and Winona Ryder returns, as does Catherine O'Hara and Michael Keaton as the demon Beetlejuice, and Jenna Ortega now has joined the cast as Lydia's daughter, and Justin Theroux is there as her boyfriend producer, because now Lydia, who was, a 15-year-old goth girl in the original Beetlejuice, is now an adult woman who can see ghosts, and she sees ghosts all the time, just like she used to see Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis. And she runs a house. She runs a show called, I think it's called Ghost House, and where she goes to haunted places that like people will tell her about and see what kind of supernatural activity is there and see about ghosts. And she talks to people, and this is filmed, and she's huge. Like, she's super famous from this. She's a local legend because that's where, she grew up, was in the town where Beetlejuice ran rampant. They don't know about him. They just know about her. But yeah, so, and she's reconnected with Catherine O'Hara because her father dies. And so she leaves the middle of a taping where she keeps thinking she's seeing Beetlejuice, and she races off to go find out what's wrong with her dad, because Catherine O'Hara is like texting her furiously but not saying what's wrong. And then they go to tell Jenna Ortega, her daughter, and they have a rift. Jenna Ortega hates her mom, which I find kind of just not surprising, because, a lot of kids hate their parents or they go through that phase. But it's kind of surprising because I would think like, oh, Lydia was a cool goth kid and now she's like a cool goth adult. And no, like, Jenna Ortega thinks her mom is bullshit. She thinks the whole supernatural element and angle is absolute bullshit. She thinks it's a big lie. And really, we find out that she's mad and upset because her father died a few years prior, and her mom can't see him. Why can you see all these ghosts, but you can't see him? And she's really upset about that. So they end up going back home for Lydia's dad's death. And it's a good thing that Jeffrey Jones is not in this, because, of course, he's a sex offender and a fucking creep. So,
Mm-hmm.
but he's there. He's not there, but the character is there as a ghost in the afterlife, which feels unnecessary, but whatever. And then there's also Beetlejuice running around where he's now in charge of a bunch of the shrunken head guys who like type away at his office for him, and he's running a business. And he's still obsessed with Lydia and has a picture on his desk and wants to get back with her and swears they're like soulmates, which is creepy as fuck.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have Willem Dafoe running around as a ghost cop who was really an actor in his real life, but he's investigating murders because Beetlejuice's ex-wife from hundreds of years ago, Monica Bellucci, has come back to life. Her body was all chopped up into pieces. And there's a Danny DeVito cameo, and he's a janitor in the afterlife, and he gets electrocuted, and he knocks over the boxes with her body parts, and then her body parts start moving around and basically she's stapling herself back together, and she's a soul sucker, and she sucks people's souls out and of their mouths, and she's on the hunt for Beetlejuice because she's mad at him and wants to get revenge. And then you also have Justin Theroux, who is Lydia's boyfriend and producer, who is kind of a creep and wants to get married and proposes to her at the wake of her father's funeral. So there is a whole shitload of things happening. It is a mess. Like plot wise, it is an absolute muddled mess. There's so many things happening. There's so much. It just feels really scattered. I will say that I have read quite a few glowing reviews of this. So I very much am clearly in the minority because I did not enjoy this, like hardly at all. It definitely has the same visuals and production design as the original, which is great. It's vivid. It's, macabre. It's offbeat. That's great. I love that. I love the use of vivid lighting, like the blues and the greens and the reds. Like it's great. I love the visuals. Catherine O'Hara is a fucking delight. Love Catherine O'Hara. I love her in anything and everything. And she is great as Delia. I love her. It's great to see this character back. She's so funny. And in her own, kind of arty world. Love that. She's great. She is grieving the loss of her husband and she's really upset. But she's also trying to channel her grief into making art. And she's doing it in kind of all these like weird, funny ways. So she's great. Michael Keaton is great. Michael Keaton, really crafted the character of Beetlejuice and made him really weird. And, whether it works for you or not, and he's doing the same thing again. And I think he is great at that weird kind of unhinged role. I think he's great too. Everything else for me did not work. Did not find this funny. I did not find this engaging. I did not find this interesting. Everything just feels like it, because there's so many plots and subplots, it just feels like it's so shoehorned in. I didn't even tell you that there's a whole other subplot where Jenna Ortega is like biking through the town like that Lydia grew up in, and still in Corinth, Vermont. I love that that's where or West Corinth, Vermont, the same town that they filmed in the original Beetlejuice. They filmed this one, the sequel. She's biking through town and she has all these like kind of madcap almost accidents where she almost runs into a truck and then she almost runs into people and then she finally crashes her bike into a fence and hits someone's tree house. And it's this guy and she's so into him because he's reading Crime and Punishment, or really he's into her because she quotes Crime and Punishment back to him. And he's like, hey, come over my house for Halloween. We'll hand out candy. And then surprise, we're not going to hand out candy. I just want to hang out with you. And then surprise, something's off because you don't see his parents' faces. And as soon as I'm like, oh, we don't see the faces, they're all dead. And surprise, they are all dead. And then he come to find out was a serial killer and he's trying to get her to swap lives with him in the afterlife so he can come back to Earth. So it's like, it's just so much. It's so much.
Yeah, it sounds busy. I mean, when Beetlejuice says he was said he was the ghost with the most, this is not what I had in mind.
Doesn't even sound like his most. It's everybody else's most.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, and he is in this a lot more than he was in the original. Because rewatching the original, he's not in it
He's
much.
barely in it.
Yeah,
like 14 minutes or something
right.
like
It's
that.
it's like a glorified cameo. And boy, does he make the most with those 14 minutes, though.
Oh, he does.
So he is in this more because, of course, Jenna Ortega's intrigued by the model in the attic. And she's about to call Beetlejuice, not knowing who he is. And Lydia's like, don't do that. Don't ever say his name. But then, of course, he does get called because they need his help. Because when Jenna Ortega goes into the afterlife, Lydia's like, I've got to save my daughter. And so she calls Beetlejuice, and then they go into the afterlife together, kind of like a weird buddy cop duo. And it's just,
channeling the cartoon, I guess.
I guess, yeah. I guess so. But yeah, and then Delia makes a deal with Beetlejuice so she can help out too. Like it's weird to me that everybody keeps calling on Beetlejuice for help, like repeatedly. But anyway, so this unfortunately did not work for me. But like I said, I apparently am in the minority because people are loving this. And that's great. I'm glad they are. I really wish I had had that same experience. For me, this doesn't even come close to capturing the magic of the original. But Catherine O'Hara's great and Michael Keaton's great. I just wish, and the visuals are great. The production design, stunning. Costumes, stunning. Just wish I'd liked the movie as a cohesive whole.
Winona Ryder is not great.
Not really, sadly. And I like her so much. It pains me to say that. She's fine. But the thing of it is it's weird. She seems not like the same character. And at first I'm watching it and I'm like, okay, are they trying to say like her life is a mess and therefore she's not the same because she's grieving the loss of her ex, even though the Jenna Ortega's father had died, but they had broken up before he had died. But I'm like, she still could be grieving that. Or is she distraught over her career? I don't know. And then there's a scene between her and Catherine O'Hara where Catherine O'Hara is like, why are you letting, this guy push you around and everything and make decisions for you, and where's the annoying goth girl who, irritated me all those years ago? Find her. And so I'm like, okay, that's a little on the nose, but okay. But then it doesn't really come to fruition. Like she doesn't really take charge of her life. And like there's a big reveal where you find out that Justin Theroux has just been lying to her to get her money. Like he doesn't care about her. He just wants to marry her for her money. And even that's not through her. That's through Beetlejuice injecting him with a truth serum. So it just was kind of unfortunate that she's not really the same character, but it also doesn't feel like she's not the same character. But here we're going to write it in a way so to show the progression of this character. It just feels like something's lacking. So she's fine, but
Does she end up seeing Jenna Ortega's dad in the afterlife?
They do.
Mm-hmm.
He is. So there's a whole thing about immigration because.
Well, it's topical, I guess.
Yeah, it is topical, but there's like a whole thing with the serial killer teenager who's into Jenna Ortega, but really is just using her. And in order to transition to the living, he has to go through immigration. So there's like the whole, just like the way in the original, there's like a whole bureaucratic process for everything. It's bureaucracy here. And Jenna Ortega's father he's one of the people like stamping like passports and stuff, and he sees her. And so he helps out her and Winona Ryder too. Well,
no, I'm kind of glad that I've missed it.
I mean, like I said, you might love it. Lots of people do, or seem to.
The original one, it's okay. It's fine. I don't ever need to see it again.
Then you might not like this.
You probably both know Tim Burton is not my kind of filmmaker.
Yes.
So
I did know that.
I think he's fucking trash. So largely.
I think he has a very uneven filmography, but I like a lot of his earlier stuff, and there's some ones in between that I enjoy. I mean, I think, I rewatched Beetlejuice recently just for funsies and talking about Tim Burton over on It's the Pictures, but I forgot how much I enjoyed it, really, on rewatch.
It's great.
I thought it was, very briskly paced.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the cast. I love the chemistry. I love the art direction. I love the music.
Oh, the music is so good.
Both the score by Danny Elfman, who also is trash, by the way.
His scores or as a person?
His score is trash?
As a person, yeah. I've heard not nice things about him as a person. And then also the music, the Harry Belafonte music is awesome too.
Yes. And this music, there is a lot of music in this, but it's very different. It's not Harry Belafonte style. There is none of that. It's different music.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I just want to clarify, when I say that Tim Burton is trash, I mean as a filmmaker. I think
you don't mean as a human.
No, I don't know anything about him as a human, really.
I don't either.
What I do know is that to me, he's like Terry Gilliam light, and I don't like Terry Gilliam either, because I don't need your fucking awesome production design if your stories are shit. Okay? So that's how I...
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely an interesting point, and it's a much longer conversation, but yeah, I mean, I just read a film critic that I love say this recently, talking about how sometimes people are like, "Oh, it's just style, no substance," but style is the substance. So I definitely agree with that the visuals can, like, and the vibe can be the soul of it.
Right.
But I also know what you're saying too, and it's like, if that's all you have, sometimes it's just not enough.
Right. I feel like that's definitely Terry Gilliam. I think Tim Burton's a little better with character. I think he does care about character, but I think I just get, especially in his lesser movies. Now, people love Edward Scissorhands, but that movie to me is just so dreary and miserable. So,
that's the point.
I know. I don't want to watch that. I don't want to watch this.
I like that.
Fucking Diane Wiest like break into someone's house so she can be like Avon calling. Oh, fucking
yeah. No, I grew tired of Tim Burton's like thing somewhere in the like 2010s era of like things like Alice in Wonderland, with movies to me that just what you're saying, it's all style and no substance. And I feel like that was definitely, he was definitely on like a run of movies where it just was like, oh God, not another one of these.
Yeah, I would be very curious, Evan, what you think of this one. Because like I said, you very well might like it. A lot of people do. I will say, my last thing I will say about this is that the Horror Queers podcast, they covered Beetlejuice very recently. And apparently they had tweeted this out, because I haven't listened to the episode yet, but they had said that they cover on the show how Delia is the best character in Beetlejuice. I agree. After having rewatched the first one and just seeing the sequel, I'm like, yes, Catherine O'Hara is a queen and can do no wrong. Love her.
Catherine O'Hara is great. She's great.
She's so great. Yep. So great. Yeah.
All right.
She's so over the top and yet grounded. And she just has great, like the way she speaks, her body language, everything just feels like unique to this character. Like, of course, it's hard not to think of Moira Rose, but at the same time, this is very much a unique character, and I just love her. She's fabulous.
Okay, well, we'll leave it on that happy note and move on to His Three Daughters, which is less happy. But let's get into, like I said at the top of the show, this is Natasha Lyonne, Elizabeth Olsen, Carrie Coon. This is about three sisters. We'll say all three of them are estranged. I was going to say one and two of them are estranged, but they're all kind of estranged. About them two of them going home to be with their third sister, Natasha Lyonne, to deal with their ailing father. Here is the IMDb summary. This tense, touching, and funny portrait of family dynamics follows three estranged sisters as they converge in a New York apartment to care for their ailing father and to try to mend their own broken relationship, that should be relationships, with one another. Fair enough. Kind of light on the vague.
Funny? Question mark. Did anyone laugh during this?
I don't think so.
I don't think that I did.
I don't even think I came anywhere close to laughing at all, ever, during this movie.
I think I found a few things kind of amusing in the way that I would find them amusing if I saw others, like two siblings doing a thing that I'm like, oh, they're getting on each other's nerves, but they're trying not to act like it, like that kind of thing. Like the conversation when Elizabeth Olsen comes out wearing her Grateful Dead t-shirt and Carrie Coon just kind of like, oh, so you're still into that, huh? And it's like, So,
Yeah.
for example, I yapped a lot and during Beetlejuice, even though it wasn't my movie.
I mean, it's hard not to have opinions, with such a robust filmography,
Right.
like, Tim Burton. So, no, I'm glad to have both of your inputs on that.
Well, we already kind of know that Evan didn't laugh once, so why don't you fill us in on some more stuff with my three daughters? I was going to say my three sisters, but that's not right.
No. Man, I really wanted to like this more than I did. I think I love these three actors individually, and I thought that I would really enjoy seeing them together. I feel like I've seen them all be better in other things. Not to say that any of them are bad here, but I don't feel like any of them are great. And I really struggled with how overbearing Carrie Coon's character Katie is on the proceedings, and just found myself getting, and I know that's the point. She's overbearing and she sucks all the oxygen out of the room, and she's just really abrasive and hard to deal with. But I found that I spent so much time dwelling on how obnoxious she was that I had a hard time like getting into the movie or appreciating, what was going on with all three sisters. And given I think that it's a prime setting for all of them to kind of like reconnect and have these like serious heart-to-heart conversations, I'm surprised that the movie doesn't do more of that. It's more just like Katie being really abrasive and Rachel and Christina kind of like trying to do their best to work around it, while also they keep talking to, the caregivers about how their father's doing. And I liked that you don't see the father through the majority of the movie, and I kind of would have loved if they never showed him. Because I think that is kind of interesting unto itself. You're only just hearing about him from other people. That said, when he did show up and he, got out of his chair and was walking around, I was like, oh, I actually kind of like this. Until I realized that he was imagining all of this and that he was just dying there in the chair. And I'm like, oh, come on. This feels like such a cliche, like to do something like this, to have a character think that they're doing something, but they're actually dying. I would have respected it more if it just wasn't realistic and the father somehow got up, had this whole monologue, and then just keeled over and died.
Oh, God, Evan. Wow.
At least it wouldn't be that like, cliche that you see in movies where it's like, oh, this person thinks that all this stuff. Oh, no, it's in their head. They're dying or they're dead.
Were we talking about Jacob's Ladder before the show?
Yes, we were.
Spoiler.
Yikes. A sneak drive-by spoiler.
Yep.
A drive-by spoiler.
Yeah, I know. Our listeners are like wounded by the side of the road from that drive-by.
Wow. Oh, that was good. Well done, Megan.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I did not love this. I didn't hate it, but I also didn't love it. I felt very meh is the word I would use to describe how I felt about this movie.
Okay.
It sounds like you hated it. No offense. Which is fair.
I mean, maybe I'm sounding a little bit more angry about it than I actually was upon watching it. But I had high hopes going in, and then they were just kind of shot.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Maybe it was the disparity between your expectations and the execution.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Megan, what about you?
Well, I clearly liked it more. But I know what you're saying. This is a bit of a slog to get through. I agree with you, Evan, that I love each of these three actors. Carrie Coon can do no wrong. I am obsessed with Carrie Coon. I think Carrie Coon is one of the finest actors of our generation, of our time, alive. If you've never seen her in The Leftovers, you are missing out on one of the finest acting performances by anyone. It is masterful. So I love seeing her, and I love seeing what she does with a role. And I think it's interesting, Evan, that you're talking about how you did not use the word repulsed, but it kind of sounded like you were repelled by her and her abrasiveness.
Yes.
I actually found her to be really fascinating. And perhaps that is just a testament to Carrie Coon. I also don't mind abrasive people. I am an abrasive person, so I did not mind that at all. And I kind of find overbearing people in scenarios like that really intriguing, like what they're covering for, what they're hiding. And so I found her kind of interesting. But I very much have seen her be better in many other things. I think she's solid here. And same with Natasha Lyonne and Elizabeth Olsen. I love both of them too. I think both of them have also been stronger in other things. I think for me, Natasha Lyonne was the one who annoyed me the most because she felt so one-dimensional. Like, it's like, okay, you get high and you bet on sports and you hang out with your dad and your boyfriend. But what else is there to you? Like, to me, there was nothing, like just nothing. And Natasha Lyonne is a very talented actor. And like, for me, she brought nothing to this role, which is it was like so unfortunate. And again, I think she's doing her best.
Yeah,
but
they don't give her a lot to work with. I feel like that's what I was getting at too about Carrie Coon's character is like she sucks the oxygen out of the room as a character, but I feel like the screenplay gives her too much, like she doesn't give the other characters enough space to exist or be more than what she thinks that they are, especially Natasha Lyonne. She barely even gets a chance to talk or say anything for like the longest time. So it's like, I don't know.
But I agree with you, but that's the thing. I feel like you don't always have to convey things through dialogue, like you can convey things wordlessly. And for me, it just didn't feel like she did that. But I do agree with you. For me, there's a problem with the screenplay. I also am not a fan. It is clear after 3 movies, I am not a fan of Azazel Jacobs. I do not like The Lovers, and I do not like French Exit at all. And again, great casts. Like The Lovers has Tracy Letts and Deborah Winger, and French Exit has Michelle Pfeiffer. So he gets great actors. I just am not clearly a fan of his work, and I'm not a fan here. However, I will say the part that you hated with the dad, I fucking loved that. I was like, yes, this movie is kicking into high gear finally. I loved it. And it is a cliche. I agree with you. I didn't care. I loved it so much because J.O. Saunders was so good.
He was great.
He was great.
He gave such a great soliloquy, and he was so moving, and it was so sensitive and tender that even though it was so cliched, I did not care. I'm like, this is great. And he's a theater actor. It clearly shows. And I just, yeah. So for me, this was a very uneven experience. Great cast. I wish the writing had been better. I wish the flow had been better. I do like the idea of digging into these thorny issues of family dynamics and fractured families, and like the whole thing about how, Katie and Carrie Coon's character and Elizabeth Olsen's character, Christina, are biological sisters, but then Rachel, Natasha Lyonne's character, is not their biological sister, and she was adopted by their dad. And that whole conversation about how, she's like, that's my dad. Like, he's the only dad I've ever known. Like, it's such a beautiful, moving part. And I think Natasha Lyonne does that scene, brilliantly. I just wish it had been spread out for more of the film. But yeah, I like the issues it's digging into. I like the premise. Great cast, some great scenes. But overall, for me, it's very uneven just because of the writing. And yeah, I wanted some more direction and more from some of the actors. Dave, what did you think?
Well, let's see. How can I put this?
Uh-oh.
I think this movie kind of sucks. And
I was waiting for him to go, piece of shit.
Yeah, it's not.
I was too.
It's not a piece of shit, but it's 2 stars max. I mean, it's
out of 4 or 5.
I know. I was just gonna say out of 4 or 5.
Out of 5.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm
That's-
not even mad at that.
Yeah, it's just, I actually think the performances are all fine. I think they're relatively one note until the big fight scene that they have in which Elizabeth Olsen loses her shit. And I've seen siblings do that. So I'm like, yeah, I buy this.
Yeah, she's great in that scene too.
She really is. When she tells them that she hates them, I was just like,
I loved that.
I was kind of like, oh, most movies won't go there. This one did. Okay. But a lot of this reminded me, unfortunately, of Jodie Foster's Home for the Holidays, just in a bad way. I do not love that movie the way a lot of people seem to, which blows my fucking mind.
I've never seen it. I need to see it.
Oh, it is irritating. I think, to me, and this is kind of like the worst thing I can really say about a movie. This feels like, and this wasn't a play first, but this feels like a photographed stage play.
It does.
It gets a little more filmic as it goes on, but the way they all three have those kind of weird soliloquies at the beginning where it's just them in the center of the frame, which is just such a uninteresting choice.
I know, it's like, that it's like showing how they're fractured, but there's a better way to do it.
Well, that, I think all of their personalities are pat. I think all of their problems are pat. I think their performances are fine, but I think the only time it stands out that any one of them is truly, well, Elizabeth Olsen during that fight scene is great. And then Natasha Lyonne when she has that bit about "that's my dad."
Yes.
But I think the rest of it is kind of predictable and stupid, frankly. I just don't. I think J.O. Sanders is great in his scene, but I was actually like, when that started happening, I was like, what the fuck is going on here? What is this great performance doing in this fucking claptrap bullshit? And then I remember thinking to myself, it's like, well, there's no way I didn't know how it was going to resolve itself, but I was like, there's no way this is real.
Yeah,
and
I
then,
thought that too.
And then when Evan, he did the thing that Evan doesn't like, which I also don't like, which is when, you've got a dying character imagining himself doing that. And it's like, well, does he have locked-in syndrome too? Like, what the fuck is going on here? Like, I'm all for things not making sense. I mean, but they have to make sense on their own terms. And this gives no indication. This movie gives no indication that kind of, the father is not on screen for an hour and 30 minutes. And then he's going to show up and imagine himself telling his daughters word for word exactly how he feels about them so that the audience doesn't have to think about it for themselves. Suck it. All right.
Well, yeah, like you said, it's not really playing by its own. Like it establishes itself as a very kind of like grounded family drama, and then it throws this like, oh, let's throw like a dream sequence in there at the end. Like, what? That's not the movie I've been watching.
Yeah,
I'm okay with that. I love a curveball.
Yeah,
But I agree with you, Dave. The part where he's like laying everything out perfectly, that's not the part of that I like. I actually like the part where he's talking about the woman he loved and how they reconnected on the street.
Which, I hate to sound like one of those people. That kind of shit. I've bumped into people that I haven't seen in a decade on a New York City street and be like, oh yeah, you used to be you don't say this. You used to be a fucking huge part of my life, and now you're just some dude or chick. Pardon me for saying chick. But yeah, I just I think that there's so much tell instead of show in this that I found that
absolutely
incredibly irritating. And I feel like if I had seen this in a theater, if it was all on stage, I would be a lot more forgiving. Not necessarily about the tell rather than show, but certainly about the mannerisms of the characters. Because Carrie Coon is a stage performer, but Natasha Lyonne and Elizabeth Olsen are not, but they're all giving stage performances. It's very strange. So this didn't really work for me at all. So I think, frankly, I'm being generous with 2 stars. I can't believe this has a fucking 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. This is further proof that Rotten Tomatoes is fucking garbage, but I don't get it. And it's not like it's bad. It's not bad. It's just incredibly lazy and disappointing. Maybe that is bad.
I mean, it depends. I guess it depends on your definition of bad. You know what I mean? Like
I mean, the one thing that I can say for it is that looks like an apartment that like a New York family could live in.
Yes, it does.
And it's clear that they shot the outdoor scenes on the bench like in a planned, housing development community. What in New York they would call projects. But it's, I don't know. I just can't. I'm just disappointed.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was thinking about this as you're talking, like about the choices made, about the framing, with the cinematography, and about the very staged mannerisms and delivery. And I feel like that was an intentional choice to kind of show the facade that each of these sisters has. But again, I don't think it works. Like it feels too, like you were talking about, their problems are pat and the characters are pat. It just feels like too easy, like almost too obvious. I don't know. It just, yeah. I think there's some weird choices made.
And I also want people to stop naming movies after the men when the men aren't in the fucking movie. His Three Daughters, The Time Traveler's Wife. Of course, now I can't think of any. I thought of like a dozen earlier today. But Evan, you've got one. You turned toward the mic. I thought you had
No,
one.
I was just laughing about that because I was also struggling to think of.
Yeah,
I was struggling to think of the patriarchy.
Oh, The Zookeeper's Wife.
mean,
there you go. There's another one.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a ton like that. And then and then when you start looking into like the girl, like
the girl
on the train, the girl with the dragon tattoo, which don't get me wrong, I love both of those books, but
yeah, but first of all, they're women, but we're calling them girls.
Right, exactly. It's extremely infantilizing. Right. No, so you're absolutely right. It's very obnoxious.
Oh, and this is what I meant by the tell thing is when Natasha Lyonne's boyfriend comes out and he just says like, she's never going to stick up for herself. So I'm gonna, it's like, fuck the fuck off. That works in real life. It does not work in your screenplay. Okay. I really, there has come like a point where writers decide they need to be so natural, they'll actually write as people would speak. And somebody would say that. I absolutely believe that. But you can't say that in a fucking movie. You can't say that. Fucking hitting me on the nose with your goddamn bullshit screenplay shaped claw hammer. Okay, next. This is one of those things, the more I think about it, the more angry I get. I can't do this. All right. And anybody have any closing thoughts?
Two things. One, we were talking about Carrie Coon's performance, and I normally think that she's great. But I found there were two situations where I feel like her performance was not strong, and they're very minute things. One is when she's having that phone call in the beginning. I feel like she's talking way too fast, even for her character to be having a phone conversation. So that part just didn't feel believable to me. But the other thing was when her and Elizabeth Olsen were drinking out of their coffee cups. And it was clear that Carrie Coon was drinking out of an empty coffee cup based on how she was holding it. And it just was clear that it was like not as good acting as Elizabeth Olsen's acting in the same scene. So I thought that was just weird. Some weird things that I noticed. And then the other thing is, as a new parent, I found Elizabeth Olsen's character very believable in the, like, I'm just talking about my kid all the time and thinking about my kid in the, like, I'm sure it's annoying to other people kind of way. So that's it.
Okay. Moving on. I believed her as the new parent too, Evan. Moving on. Let's talk about Merchant Ivory, which is a documentary about Merchant Ivory, the production house and the people, Ismail Merchant and James Ivory. Going over to your IMDb summary. I haven't rolled it up yet. One sentence. Here we go. Follows the history of the Merchant Ivory partnership, featuring interviews with James Ivory, who is up there. I mean, I didn't know. I can't believe he's still with us. With James Ivory and close collaborators detailing and celebrating their experiences of being part of the company. And so this has like everybody who's ever been in a Merchant Ivory movie, more or less, except for like Anthony Hopkins and Daniel Day-Lewis. I think they're the only ones who are kind of like big, you know. I mean, Daniel Day-Lewis was only a supporting character in A Room with a View. But I mean, Anthony Hopkins, two of his most famous performances are Merchant Ivory movies.
Absolutely.
It is a very glaring omission, especially when you find out that he had to sue them to get paid for one of their later movies.
Yep.
It's like, oh, I wonder if this is why this is happening. Well, Megan, what did you think about this documentary of the history of Merchant Ivory and all that stuff?
So I didn't really know much about them other than they were both gay men. And obviously I'm familiar with their films, that their lavish production design and period pieces and esteemed casts. But I haven't seen really any of their films, which is, I feel kind of embarrassed to say because I feel like it's such a glaring hole. But I was really intrigued by this. And even though haven't seen a lot of I take that back. I've seen Remains of the Day. I take it all back. Seen Remains of the Day, which is excellent, a brilliant film. And I was very compelled by the camaraderie between the entire Merchant Ivory production crew, and the very messy, joyously messy interpersonal relationships between all of them. And it was really intriguing to hear about James Ivory and Ismail Merchant's relationship. And I'm always excited for queer history. I'm always excited to learn about, queer filmmaking, queer movies, queer filmmakers. And so that was great to hear about how their history individually, and then when they came to work together and their romantic partnership, and how they had an open relationship and how they dated other people and how they worked together and how fun the set was, like how it was like fun but also really stressful because they were always penny pinching and they had to do these really lavish looking
That was the thing that surprised me the most.
Yes, the lavish looking films on this like tiny micro budget. It blew my mind because I just assumed they were like spending like $1 bajillion on these movies.
Especially after they became really successful.
Yes. And yet they weren't. They were still like penny pinching everywhere, getting things on the cheap constantly. And like, hearing Jenny Beavan, the famous costume designer, talking about how they would do the clothing on the cheap. Like that was fascinating to me. So yeah, that's probably the most compelling part. I also really found the part where Emma Thompson and Hugh Grant are talking about Anthony Hopkins' performances in Remains of the Day and Howard's End, but especially in Remains of the Day, how they both call it a perfect performance and their love for that film and the craftsmanship of acting. Like that I really loved too. So I found this really intriguing for me because I didn't know a ton about them. And I thought it was kind of interesting the way James Ivory would answer certain questions when he was asked. And also Vanessa Redgrave, who got very pissed off by one of the questions she was asked. So yeah, that was it's a compelling documentary, but it's also very kind of standard and formulaic in its delivery of information and in its exploration of their lives. This is not the most exciting documentary as far as its structuring or as far as the way it's edited or the way it tells this story. It's just like, okay, here they are, and then we're going to focus on James Ivory, and this is his background, and then we're going to focus on Ismail Merchant, and then we're going to focus on the screenwriter, and then we're going to focus on the composer, and then we're going to focus on this. So it's very like do, and it even structures it based on chapters.
It's very do.
Yeah, do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can picture it.
Thank you. But yeah, and it even is structured on chapters, which I guess kind of makes sense because they adapted so many classic novels that I would get like, how are we breaking this down? All of these people and their very complicated lives, but it still feels almost too rudimentary in that way, too introductory. But at the same time, I really found this compelling. So I guess that's where I land on this. Dave, what did you think?
I found it compelling, but also just kind of, it's strange to say that something's compelling and not very interesting at the same time. But I think I have a
But
lot.
I know what you mean.
I have a lot of the same complaints. I think a big part of it is because Ruth Prauer, I can't pronounce her last name, Jabvala, is dead, and so is Ismail Merchant. And I think there's such key components to that story, and so it's interesting to hear James Ivory say, "Oh, well, Ruth didn't want to work on Morris because she considered that sub Forrester." It's like, ooh, boy.
Which is kind of amazing to hear.
But then but
is that true?
I don't know. But then this guy who did write it, the screenwriter, is like, of course, she did end up, giving us the best idea that is that we did use in the movie. And it's like, oh, okay, well, what an interesting relationship you all must have had. But also, Ismail Merchant is the one I find even more fascinating than all of them, because they just paint him as, I like that James Ivory says, well, he was a con man, because all good producers are con men, which I see that. But just, I would have loved to have heard from him directly. But he's been gone a long time. So one thing I didn't know that Ruth Prauer was a German Jew who fled Nazi Germany. Had no idea. And I did like the anecdote. I can't remember who told it, but somebody moved to India and Ruth says, "Oh, hey, I'm your neighbor. What books do you have?" And then she's like, "Oh, I'll show you my books." And she goes through, she's like, "Oh no, I've already read all these." I thought that was a great story.
It's adorable.
Yeah. I don't know if I never knew. This is surprising. I don't know if I never knew or if I'd forgotten James Ivory wrote Call Me by Your Name. The screenplay, I mean. But I think he was kind of fascinating too, but he's also very buttoned up in a way. Which is fine. He's raised in a very different time, but which he makes reference to several times throughout the movie, and so does the interviewer, who I think is one of the directors. Yeah, but it's just fine. There's nothing. It's kind of like you watch these documentaries, especially about, in air quotes, great people, unquote. And it's like, well, what I want to, like, I liked the story of Natasha McElhone saying she was doing interviews for whatever movie she was in, and she kept saying, well, James doesn't really direct. And then he comes up to her after like the third time she does it, and he's like, I think you should stop telling people that I don't direct. That's the kind of stuff I want to hear, You want
to hear the messy stuff.
Yeah, well,
like
not
the
even
honest stuff, the raw stuff.
Yeah, but it's not in, I mean, I see what you mean when you say messy, but at the same time, it's kind of like, you hear every actor say the best directors are the ones who are like, whatever, I not that I think that Christopher Nolan is a great director, but he's fine. He's wonderful. Whatever. I know there are people who fucking revere him. Okay, go ahead. But there's that interview with Gary Oldman where he says, I think, throughout the 3 Batman films, I got 2 notes from Christopher Nolan. And one of them is, this scene is more serious. I was like, oh, okay. And that was the note. I was like, and those are the kind of stories I want to hear. And I liked the Jenny Bevan story about, how they reused clothes and this, that, and the other, and how, because everything was so on the cheap, they would lend their clothes out to other productions as like rentals so they could earn some money off those. And she'll be like, oh, I recognize that blouse.
Yeah. That was great.
That kind of stuff is cool. But like, I've seen Hella Bonham Carter interviewed 8 million times. I don't need it. Like, I would love to see somebody do a documentary on Hugh Grant just because he's such a fucking weirdo. I like Emma Thompson, but it's just like a lot of these people. Like, I know that Vanessa Redgrave is prickly. I don't. Whatever. I also think that because some of the interviews were clearly done on Zoom, although they did clean up the pictures very well.
Yeah, they did.
Like, the sound is crummy in some of them. You can hear that weird early like MPEG or MP3 crackly thing when you've got like the bad conversion rate. So I'm glad I saw this because I've seen a lot of Merchant Ivory films, and I am interested in the story behind, say, like Jefferson in Paris. And I didn't know that one of the reasons it tanked is because, I guess critics were like, what do you mean he had affairs with his slaves? It's like,
Yep.
pretty sure people had been saying that long before those biographies came out. So I don't know. I feel like there's a lot here that didn't get explored quite as deeply as I wanted it to. It's not bad, but
What do you wish it had explored more?
I think, and I do not fault the filmmakers for this because the two other main characters in this story are long dead.
Yeah.
But I think that both of them, I mean, they both sound like the things that they say about Ruth Proverb, can't pronounce last name. She sounds like she was fascinating,
Mhm.
And Ismail Merchant, the few video clips you see of him, he seems like he was fascinating, and the couple of the anecdotes you hear, it's like, well, when they didn't have any money, he started like making a meal for like the entire cast and crew so that it was like, oh, it'll be good vibes and whatever. And everyone kind of forgot for a few days that they weren't paid on time.
Right.
Like, I think.
And like, yeah, it's so homey, but also it's saving a fuck ton of money.
Yeah. So that's the kind of thing that I wish it had. But it's not.
Yeah.
It's not like a deal breaker. This is definitely the kind of things like, oh, I like Merchant Ivory movies. I'll watch this. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it sheds some light on, their background and the making of, which I think is really fascinating. I will say I did like the anecdotes and the stories that people were sharing about Ismail Merchant, about him being kind of larger than life. Like, I don't remember who says this, but somebody was like, well, you hated him, but you loved him.
Yeah.
he was lovable, but he was a pain in the ass. And like, I just got a very vivid image of the type of person he was and how he, was probably always joking and just very gregarious. And
I don't necessarily, I feel like I learned more about his personal relationship with James Ivory from James Ivory than I did about what he was like as a filmmaker. And I understand it's important because you've got these two, this production, this collaborative team also have personal relationships, all of these things in times when that was not supposed to be, and how they managed to get through it without, Ismail Merchant's family finding out and having, conservative family, for example, James Ivory living with them for quite a while. Those are the kinds of things that, like, I feel like that informs your work, that informs Morris, and that informs, so many other things. And it's just, I feel like it's kind of glossed over and kind of like we know this about Merchant Ivory, so let's just move on to the other thing, it's fine.
You're saying that we know about the repression, and so
I'm saying that the filmmakers are treating it about like we know about it, so they're just kind of skating over it.
I see.
And again, I think it's not necessarily their fault because you're missing Ismail Merchant's side of the story. But I did like that anecdote where there was one guy, I can't remember, it was another one of their screenwriters who said, I was in the office for most of the day, and Ismail was he must have called tens and tens and tens and tens of people just being like, hey, I need 150,000 pounds. I need $150,000. I need it tomorrow. Like, and just how he called everybody he knew to find money. That's what producers do, by the way, people.
Yes.
But he was also creative producer. And I also like how James Ivory basically said their professional relationship began to suffer when Ismail started directing his own movies.
Yeah.
Which you can see that diversion when you look at that divergence when you look at their catalog. So more of that, please. That's another Ismail Merchant story.
I know. And that almost feels like it was tacked on. Like, oh, we're running out of time.
Absolutely.
That's happening. And oh, now we're done. Yeah, no, I agree. Speaking about like the whole thought of like their personal lives informing their body of work and like the whole notion of like, two gay men in an interracial relationship and repression and how repression is so much, you're right, it's so much of the work. Like that's, like Remains of the Day is like
Remains
that.
of the Day.
Morris is like that. And yeah, like absolutely. And I know like so many of their films are like that. And I'm aware of that and I haven't even seen most of their films. But I feel like that if you're not getting that information from the director, the cast, the crew, like that's when you can pull in like a film critic or a film historian to like fill in those gaps and to contextualize. It just would have been maybe a little nice.
Yeah.
That had happened too.
And for example, talk to some of the critics who railed Jefferson in Paris and have them watch it last year and be like, well, what do you think of it now? Especially now that you know that like Jefferson did everything he was accused of in this movie. For example.
Yeah, with that one, I am curious if it was just, I know it was critically panned, but I do also wonder if it was, public opinion too that.
I think that I think that Nick Nolte is miscast as Jefferson, but that's me.
Yeah, that would very much make sense.
And Surviving Picasso's kind of a crummy movie, it just is. Soldier's Daughter Never Cries, kind of like, who gives a shit? Like, I don't care about James Jones. Like, great, you wrote Thin Red Line. Congratulations. Anyway. That's all I have to say.
Me too.
Okay. So, Evan, I don't know if we spoiler pieced you into wanting to see it. Probably not. But
I've seen 0 of their movies and I literally knew nothing about them. So that's why I was so quiet, listeners. I was kind of taking it in. But yeah, I don't know if this enticed me.
I see that. Well, Megan, did you have closing thoughts on that? Or are you good?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Well, it sounds like from Megan's review, we have a skip Beetlejuice. But
I think many people are going to love this and want to see it. So if you want to see it, but if you're on the fence, maybe wait. But yeah, I did not have fun with this, sadly.
Okay. I think His Three Daughters is a pass, but what do you two say?
I would also say pass, even though
yes.
even though I did like parts of it, I think this cast, I think they're all excellent and other better things.
And I'd say Merchant Ivory is a year mile. Oh, Evan, I'm sorry. You were going to say something else.
No, I just agree with what Megan says. I think it's a pass for those reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think Merchant Ivory is a classic. Your mileage may vary.
Yeah. I would recommend it because I learned some things and compelling, but absolutely. It's not going to be for everyone.
Yeah. Well, okay, gang. Thank you for listening to this episode of Spoiler Piece Theater. Want to thank our sponsor piece patron, Heather Sachs, for being our sponsor piece patron. Thank you, Heather, so much for doing that for us. Yay.
Thanks, Heather.
Yeah, thanks.
Want to thank our editor, Otto Clamor, for doing the heavy lifting, making us sound good every week. Thank you, Otto.
Thanks, Otto.
Thanks, Otto.
You can find Spoiler Piece Theater anywhere you get podcasts. Our website is spoilerpiece.com. On social media, we're Spoiler Piece Theater on Facebook, and we're at Spoiler Piece on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Threads, Blue Sky? ? I can't remember if we're there yet.
Not yet.
If you'd like to get in touch with us and tell us that Merchant Ivory is fucking amazing and totally deep, you can email us at spoilerpiece@gmail.com, or you can give us a call
at 862-21-PEACE.
And leave a voicemail and let us know what you thought of His Three Daughters. We seem to be the only 3 film critics in the world who don't like it. So I'd say that is worth you all giving it a watch and letting us know that we're all a bunch of boneheads. Thank you very much. If you like the show, please rate and review us by going to Rate This Codcast. Yes, we also do a podcast about fish. RateThisPodcast.com/spoilerpiece, or you can rate us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you really like the show, please consider joining our Patreon. I said it at the top, but I'll say it now. We decided to do a movie that has a big, big twist ending and spoil it for you. We did the 1987 spy thriller No Way Out, starring Kevin Costner, Sean Young, and Gene Hackman. And That's everything. My name is Dave Riedel. I write about movies. I'm a member of the Boston Online Film Critics Association, and social media, blah, blah, Dave sees movies.
My name is Evan Crean. I am co-chair of the Boston Online Film Critics Association, co-author of your 80s Movie Guide to Better Living, and co-host of the It's the Pictures podcast. You can follow me on social media as Real Recon, and that's real as in film reel.
And my name is Megan Kearns. I write for Edge Media Network. I'm a co-host of the Slashers podcast. I, too, am a member of the Boston Online Film Critics Association and a member of Gallica. You can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at OpinionS World or on Instagram and Letterboxd at The OpinionS.
Thanks for joining us. See you next week.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.